They took one look at her light blue shirt and called her the Help. Alexandra Vance is a black woman, 32, and she owns the company they thought she'd come to clean. 6 years ago, her father died in a tanker explosion the world called an accident. She rebuilt what he left behind. Now she walks the service corridor to her own boardroom, documents pressed to her chest, hair moving in the wind off the helipad. Inside waits Jeon Mugyol, 39. They call him the Quiet One. A dragon tattoo climbs the left side of his neck toward his jaw. Charcoal suit. Watch that costs more than most people earn in a year. Acting CEO of the company he does not own. He doesn't recognize her. Maids don't enter the boardroom, he says. She sets down the papers. Calm. Level. I called this meeting. The lawyer confirms it. She is the majority holder, the legal chair. One by one, the entire board rises to receive her, and the man who ran the room like a king watches his throne dissolve in front of 40 faces. But the fight for control was only beginning. Because the audit she demanded would touch operations no one wanted opened, and buried in falsified shipping records, something was waiting that would tie her father's death to a hand she never suspected. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Alexandra Vance signed her name at the bottom of the meeting notice and slid it across the desk before the head of legal could read the last line. He read it anyway. His pen stopped over the signature block, and he looked up at her the way men had looked at her father in the final year, when the numbers stopped adding to anything good. You're sure about the timing, he said. 9 o'clock. Tomorrow. Full board. He'll be in that room. That's the point. She kept her hand flat on the paper. The camera on the far wall blinked its small red eye at both of them, and she was aware of it, the way you're aware of a tooth that has started to ache. Everything in this building watched now. She had learned to sign, to walk, to breathe as if a stranger were always 3 feet behind her, because usually one was. The lawyer left with the notice. She stayed. Through the glass, the harbor lay flat and gray under the port cranes. 40 of them, arms lifted like a line of gallows against the water. Aegis Meridian owned 19 of those cranes. Her father had bought the first one with money he did not have. At an auction, 3 other men walked out of because they thought the terminal was cursed. 6 ships had sunk off that berth in a decade. He bought it anyway. He said cursed water was cheap water. Then a tanker split open at that same berth 6 years ago and burned for 2 days, and her father was on the deck when it happened, and now the water was cursed in a way no auction could discount. Alexandra pulled the folder toward her. Inside were the shipping manifests she had requested 9 times. 9 requests, 4 of them answered, and the 4 answers did not match each other. She had stopped being surprised by that. She had started being careful instead. She heard the elevator before the door. Everyone in the building heard elevators before doors now. Koo Hee-jin came in without knocking, tablet locked against her forearm, Bob swinging at her jaw. She set the tablet down, tapped it twice, and turned it so Alexandra could see the screen. A wire transfer, a shell name, a routing chain that folded back on itself like a snake eating its tail. This one cleared at 4 this morning, Hee-jin said. Storage lease, warehouse 6, signed off before either of us saw the request. Signed by whom? Interim Executive Authority. Alexandra did not say the name. Neither of them said the name. The office was swept for microphones twice a week, and they still did not say the name inside it, because saying it out loud had a way of making the man appear. He's spending my money, Alexandra said, on my building, to store cargo I can't inspect. Legally, he can, The emergency agreement gave him operational sign-off up to a ceiling. He's staying $1 under the ceiling every time. He knows the ceiling. He wrote half of it. Alexandra turned the tablet face down. That small movement, a woman turning a screen against a table, was the largest act of defiance she had permitted herself in 6 months, and she was tired of it being large. The emergency agreement was a thing she had not signed. Her father's estate had signed it, through a trustee, in the 90 days when Alexandra was still identifying a body by a watch and a ring, because there was not enough of the rest to identify. In those 90 days, the board panicked. Ships were stranded. Insurers circled. Someone had to keep the cranes moving, and the man who kept them moving was a man nobody on the board had chosen, and nobody on the board could now remove. John Mugyol, brought in as interim, granted the powers of a chief executive, acting since the first week as if the powers were a deed. She had spent 6 years earning her way back into her own inheritance, one signature at a time. She held 51% of the shares. She held the title of president on paper. And every morning, she walked into a building where the men in the good chairs stood up when Mugyol entered and stayed seated when she did. "Tell me the count for tomorrow," she said. Hai-jin brought the number up from memory. 11 directors, 6 you can predict, 3 you can't, 2 are his outright. 6 isn't a majority of 11. 6 is a majority if 2 of the 3 break your way. That's the whole game. 2 people, 1 room. And if they don't break? Hai-jin did not answer with a word. She reached over, turned the tablet back up, and let the transfer sit on the screen between them, glowing. 4 in the morning, $1 under the ceiling. That was the answer. If they don't break, this is every morning, forever, until there's nothing left to lease. Alexandra stood and walked to the glass. Down on the apron, a crew was lashing containers on a feeder ship, and a man in a hard hat waved a second man back from the edge of a stack, and the whole slow choreography of the port went on the way it had gone on when her father ran it. When she was a girl doing homework in the dispatch office with a headset too big for her ears. She had known the names of the tugboats before she knew the names of state capitals. She had known which berth flooded at spring tide. This was not a company she had inherited. It was a language she had been born speaking, and a stranger had walked in and started giving orders in it, and the terrible part was that his orders were good. That was the part nobody warned you about. The man taking your house kept the gutters clean. "He's not incompetent," she said, mostly to the glass. "No," Hai-jin said. "That would be easier." Alexandra put her fingertip against the cold pane, over the shape of Warehouse 6, far down the quay, a long white shed with its roll door shut. Cargo she couldn't inspect. She held the fingertip there until the glass fogged a small circle, and then she took it away. "I want the manifests for 6, she said. "The real ones, not the 4 that don't match. They won't exist in the system he controls. Then they exist somewhere else. Customs, the insurer. The tug company logs what tonnage crosses the sill whether he likes it or not." Hai-jin's pen was already moving on the tablet. A short list, 3 sources, and for the first time that morning, something in her face changed. Not a smile, a sharpening. She had been a compliance lawyer at 3 firms before this, and had left all 3 the same way, by finding the thing the partners hoped she wouldn't, and here was a woman handing her a rock and pointing at a place to turn it over. "You understand what you're doing," Hai-jin said, quiet now. "You call a full board meeting and stand in front of 11 people and the man they stand up for, and if you can't move 2 of them, you've shown him your whole hand. He'll know exactly how alone you are. He already knows how alone I am. He suspects. Tomorrow, you'd confirm it." Alexandra came back to the desk and picked up the meeting notice, the copy with her own signature, and read her own name at the bottom, as if a stranger had written it. Alexandra Vance, President. The 2 words her father had circled in a will nobody had let her enforce. "I've spent 6 years being careful," she said. "Careful got me a company where I turned tablets face down. I'm done being the most careful person in the building." She did not raise her voice when she said it. She had learned a long time ago that the women who got heard in port company boardrooms were not the ones who got loud. She set the notice down squarely, corners to the desk edge, the way her father squared everything, and Hei-jin watched her do it and understood that the decision had a spine under it and was not going to bend by evening. 9 o'clock, Hei-jin said. 9 o'clock. The lawyer gathered her tablet and left, and the office was quiet again except for the small mechanical patience of the camera in the corner. Alexandra worked alone until the harbor lights came on. She read the 4 manifests that didn't match until she could recite the tonnages that changed between versions, the 1 container that appeared on 2 lists and vanished on a 3rd, the reefer unit logged as empty inbound and empty outbound, which was a thing that did not happen because empty reefers were money leaking in refrigeration for no cargo. The reefer bothered her most. She pulled the version that logged it empty both ways and set it beside the version that didn't mention it at all, and she lined the 2 sheets up on the desk, edge to edge, and stared at the gap between them until the gap had a shape. An empty box does not travel. Someone pays to move an empty box only when the box is a lie, and a lie that expensive is not covering for laziness, it is covering for weight. She thought about the word weight for a long time. In her father's mouth, it had meant tonnage across the sill, honest steel, honest cargo. In this building, it had started to mean something else, and she did not yet have the word for the something else, and she made herself sit with not having it. She wrote the reefer's container number on the pad and circled it twice, the way her father circled her name in the will. She wrote 3 questions on a legal pad. She did not write answers. Answers were tomorrow's business, or next week's, or a month's, and she had learned to let a question sit without rushing to close it, because a question closed too early was a door shut on the truth. When she finally stood, her back ached from the chair, and she gathered her things and did the thing she did every night without deciding to do it anymore. She checked the drawer, bottom left, locked, the small key on the ring with her house keys. Inside was a single object, and she did not take it out. She only looked, confirmed it was there, and locked the drawer again. It was her father's watch, the one the coroner had used, with the ring, to tell her that the burned man on the deck of the tanker had been her father. The steel back was scorched. The crystal had survived. It had stopped at 3:14 in the morning, the hour the fuel found the air, and she had never wound it, because winding it felt like arguing with the last true thing it had to say. Everyone told her it was an accident. The insurers said fault at the valve. The internal report said fault at the valve. A tired pump operator, a stuck relief valve, a spark, a fireball, an old man in the wrong place doing the walk he always did. Fault at the valve. She had read that phrase so many times it had stopped being language. She believed none of it. She could not have told you why, in a way that would hold up in a room full of engineers. She only knew that her father had walked that deck 10,000 times and never once stood downwind of a fueling valve, and that a man who taught his daughter which berth flooded at spring tide did not die of not knowing where the wind was. But belief was not evidence. Belief was the thing that had kept her careful for 6 years while it slowly starved. Tomorrow was not about the valve. Tomorrow was about the room. Get the room, and one day you get the manifests. Get the manifests, and one day, maybe, you get the valve. She locked the drawer. She locked the office. She rode the elevator down past 19 floors of a building her father built. and the security guard in the lobby, an older man named Okafor, who had worked the night desk since she was in braces, stood up when she came out, the only man in the building who stood up for her out of respect and not surveillance. "Late one, Miss Vance. Big day tomorrow, Mr. Okafor. They're all big days, the way you work." She smiled at that, the first real one of the day, and it cost her nothing and was gone by the revolving door. Morning came the way port mornings come, gray first, then a hard, low sun off the water that turned every windshield in the lot into a white blade. Alexandra dressed the way she always dressed, for the days that mattered, which was to say plainly, a light blue shirt open at the collar. The tortoiseshell glasses she had worn since law school, heavy square frames the color of dark honey, the ones her father used to tap and call her counselor through. The thin gold chain at her throat with its small horizontal pendant, the one piece of her mother she still wore. No blazer, no armor a stranger would recognize as armor. She had decided years ago that she would not dress like a woman trying to prove she belonged in a building her family owned. The building could prove it. That was the building's job. She drove herself. She always drove herself. She parked in the same lot as the crews because her father had parked there, and she carried the meeting documents in a plain folder under her arm, and she walked toward the tower with the harbor wind coming off the water and lifting her hair in long, dark ribbons, streaked copper at the edges, and she did not know yet that the front entrance would be closed. She found it out at the top of the ramp. Two men in high-visibility vests, a length of orange barrier tape, and a helicopter sitting where no helicopter should be, squatting on the executive helipad 2 levels up with its rotor still turning down, a slow last few revolutions, like a fan losing its argument with the wind. "Ma'am, main lobby's shut," the nearer man said, not unkindly, not looking at her twice. "Emergency landing cleared the pad, and the fire marshal wants the front doors held till they sign off on the tanks. 15 minutes, maybe." 15 minutes. The board sat at 9. She had built the entire morning around walking through the front doors of her father's building at 8:50 with the sun behind her, being seen to arrive, being seen to belong, and a helicopter she had not ordered had taken that from her before she reached the door. "Is there another way up?" she said. The man tilted his head toward the side of the building, where a gray steel door under a stenciled sign led into the part of the tower guests never saw. "Service passage, comes up by the freight cars and the kitchens. Staff use it. You staff?" She looked at the door. She looked at the helicopter. Somewhere 3 floors up, in a boardroom with her father's name on the cornerstone below it, 11 directors were taking their seats, and 2 of them held her whole future in whether they broke left or right, and the only path to that room now ran through the door the staff used, past the freight elevators and the kitchens, in a light blue shirt, with a folder under her arm, and no blazer to announce her. She thought about waiting 15 minutes. She thought about walking in late, after the coffee, after the man in the good chair had already stood up for someone else and set the temperature of the room. Then she thought about her father, squaring the corners of everything he ever set down on a desk. "Yes," Alexandra said. "I'm staff." She said it to a stranger who would never know it was a lie and a truth at once, and she walked toward the gray steel door with the wind at her back and the sun turning her glasses to 2 small green mirrors, and she pulled it open, and she went in. The service corridor smelled of scorched coffee and diesel. Alexandra kept the documents flat against her chest and moved past the carts and the men in reflective vests, and none of them looked at her twice. That was the point of the corridor. Nobody important came through here. She counted the doors by memory. Her father had walked this same back route the year he bought the terminal, when he wanted to reach a meeting without being announced. She reached the freight elevator. A man in a vest held it, saw the blue shirt, saw the badge she didn't have, and let the doors start to close. She put her hand on the rubber edge. 19, she said. He hesitated, then pressed it for her. The way you press a button for someone you've already decided doesn't matter. She let him think it. The doors shut on the smell of the loading dock, and she watched the numbers climb. At the 9th floor, the car stopped. A woman in catering black stepped in with a tray of glasses, nodded at Alexandra like a colleague, and said, "They moved it to the big room. Some fire thing downstairs." I heard. You serving or setting? Alexandra looked at the tray, then at the woman's tired eyes. Setting, she said. It cost her nothing, and it bought her another floor of quiet. The numbers climbed again. 14, 16. She turned the container number over in her mind, the one she'd circled at her kitchen table, the box that appeared on 2 manifests and vanished on a 3rd. She was not going to say it today. Today she only needed the room. 19. The doors opened onto the rear of the executive floor, behind the coat station, where the carpet changed from industrial gray to the deep blue her father had chosen because it hid nothing and forgave nothing. Voices came from around the corner. The big room's double doors stood open. She could hear the particular sound of 11 people waiting for a fight that hadn't been scheduled. She set the catering woman free with a small nod and walked toward the doors alone. He was already speaking when she reached the threshold. Jeon Mugyol stood at the head of the long table with his back half to the entrance, one hand resting flat on the wood, the other loose at his side. Charcoal suit, collar open. He had the room the way some men have a room, not by raising his voice, but by making everyone wait for it to arrive. 2 of the directors leaned toward him. The rest sat with the stiff politeness of people who had learned to keep their hands visible. The emergency structure exists for exactly this kind of instability, he was saying. We stabilize first. We ask questions after we... He stopped because the light had changed. Someone had come into the doorway and the morning came in with her, and the whole far wall of glass threw it back. He turned his head. He saw a woman in a pale blue shirt, no jacket, glasses catching the green off the harbor, a stack of folders held to her chest like a schoolgirl's books. He saw the badge she wasn't wearing. He filed her in half a second the way he filed everything. A category, a use, a level of attention, and he made her nothing. We're closed in here, he said, flat, not unkind, the tone you'd use on furniture that had wandered in. Deliveries and setup use the side station. Alexandra stayed in the doorway. A director near the middle of the table, gray suit, folder open in front of him, lifted his head and went still. Mugyol had already turned back to the 2 men beside him. As I was saying, the audit they're demanding takes 90 days minimum and freezes port throughput during peak. I'm not set up, Alexandra said. The room's small noise stopped. He looked at her again, and this time something crossed his face. Not recognition, only irritation at being made to look twice. Then you're lost, he said. This is a board meeting. Maids don't enter the boardroom. He said it the way a man says a thing he's certain of. He said it to be done with her, so he could return to the sentence he'd been building. 2 of the directors looked at the table. One let out a breath through his nose that might have been a laugh. Alexandra didn't flinch. She had spent a night deciding she would not flinch, and the decision held. I called this meeting, she said. The words were quiet. They didn't need to be loud. They landed in the middle of the long table and sat there. Mugyol's hand came off the wood. For a moment, nobody moved to help her, and nobody moved to stop her. And in that gap, she walked into the room. Not fast. She crossed the blue carpet the way her father crossed it, heel first, unhurried, letting the distance close on her own count. She set the folders down at the empty chair at the opposite head of the table, the far end, the chair that faced his, and she pulled it out, and she did not yet sit. You're mistaken, Mughal said. There was iron under it now. Access to this session is restricted to the board and executive officers. If you have business with the company, you can leave it with Mr. Ree, Alexandra said, without looking away from Mughal. The gray suit in the middle of the table stood so fast his chair rolled back and hit the credenza. Ree, head of the legal group, the man who had questioned her timing on the phone 2 nights ago and then done exactly what she asked. He had a single sheet in his hand, and his voice came out too careful. The voice of a lawyer who knows every word is now on a record. For the minutes, Ree said. The individual at the north head of the table is Ms. Alexandra Vance. The name moved through the room like a change in pressure. A director at the far side put down his pen. Another turned in his seat to look at the woman in the blue shirt, as if the shirt had rearranged itself into something else. Mughal's face did one thing only. The muscle along his jaw set. Ms. Vance, Ree went on, reading now, because reading was safer than speaking, holds 51% of the issued voting shares of Aegis Meridian Holdings and is the named chair of this board under the articles as filed. Her authority to convene, to sit, and to preside is not conditional on the emergency instrument. He set the sheet down. He looked, for 1 second, like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and found ground. That instrument, Ree said, quieter, grants interim operating authority. It does not grant ownership. It never did. The silence after that had weight. Alexandra watched Mughal take it. She watched him understand, in the space of 3 breaths, that the maid he had waved toward the side door owned the room, the table, the chair he was standing beside, and the majority of the company he had been running as his own for 6 years. She watched him not look away. That was the first thing she learned about him that mattered, that he took it standing, eyes forward, and did not reach for the table again. The 2 directors who had leaned toward him a minute ago now leaned back. One of the 11 rose. An older man, thin, silver at the temples, Director Bay, who had known her father, who had come to the funeral and shaken her hand and said nothing useful. He stood the way you stand in a church, and once he was up, the arithmetic of the room did what arithmetic does. A second director rose, then 2 at once. The scrape of chairs came in a ragged little wave down both sides of the long table, and within a few seconds, every man and woman on the board of Aegis Meridian was on their feet. For her, Alexandra had not asked them to stand. She would think about that later, that the standing was not loyalty, it was calculation. 11 people reading the shares in the room and choosing the 51 over the 45 in real time, out loud, with their bodies. But it did not feel like nothing. Her mother's chain lay cool against her collarbone, and she was aware of it, and she kept her chin level and let them stand. Mughal remained where he was. He was the last figure at the table, still in the posture of a host, and the room had just told him he was a guest. Please, Alexandra said, sit. They sat. The wave ran backward, chairs finding the floor. Mughal did not sit. You planned this, he said. His voice had dropped. It was not a shout. She'd been told he never shouted, and now she saw it was true. The anger went the other direction, down into something colder and more contained. The helicopter, the corridor. You came in through the back, so I came in through the back because the front was closed, Alexandra said. You said the rest. Something in his eyes acknowledged the hit. He was a man who kept score, and he had just been made to keep score against himself in front of the only audience that could cost him anything. Sit down, Mr. Gian, she said. You have a seat at this table. I'm not taking it from you. She let that land before the rest. Yet. He sat. He did it slowly, and he did it without dropping his gaze. And when he was seated, he laced his fingers on the table and became very still, and she understood she had made an enemy who would not make noise about it. That was more dangerous than the other kind. She'd take it. Ree was still standing. "Ms. Vance, do you wish to formally open the session?" "I do." She finally sat, drew the folders in front of her, squared them. The morning was full behind her now, and the directors had to look into it to look at her, and she had chosen the north chair for that reason too. Her father had taught her that without ever saying it. "For the record, I convened this board to review the exercise of interim authority granted under the emergency instrument of 6 years ago, specifically, its scope, its accountability, and its expiration." A director halfway down cleared his throat. Choi, one of the two she'd tagged as Mugyals. "The instrument has no expiration," he said. "It runs until the board resolves stability." "Then the board will resolve stability today," Alexandra said. "That's why we're here." Choi looked at Mugyal. Mugyal looked at nothing. "There are 11 of you," Alexandra went on, and she let her eyes travel the table, unhurried, naming none of them but touching each. "Some of you knew my father. Some of you were brought in after. I'm not going to ask which. I'm going to ask you to read what's in front of you, and then I'm going to ask you to vote." She opened the top folder and slid the first document toward Ree, who passed it down. Copies traveled hand to hand along both sides of the table. She had made 11 of them at a print shop 4 blocks from her apartment, at 11 at night, because the machines in this building answered to a system she did not control. "That's the emergency instrument," she said. "The real one, not the summary that circulates. Clause 9, which most of you have never seen, caps interim operating sign-off at a fixed ceiling per transaction and requires board notice above it." Paper turned. A director frowned at Clause 9. 2 nights ago, Alexandra said, at 4 in the morning, a lease on Warehouse 6 was executed under interim authority, $1 below the ceiling, in Clause 9. No board notice, because $1 below the ceiling means no notice is required. Someone down the table said, very quietly, 4 in the morning. "I'm not making an accusation," Alexandra said, and she felt Mugyal's attention sharpen without his face moving at all. "I'm showing you a design. A ceiling exists to protect this company. When every transaction lands $1 under it, the ceiling isn't being respected. It's being used." She closed the folder. "I'm not here to fight about a warehouse. I'm here because a structure that was meant to last 90 days has run for 6 years, and in 6 years, no one in this room has asked it a single question. I'm asking now." The room had gone from a place where a woman was told to use the side door to a place where 11 people were reading Clause 9 and doing math. She could see it happening. She could see the 3 she'd marked as uncertain, the ones she needed, pull the document a little closer. Mugyal unlaced his fingers. "May I respond?" he said. Not a question, but he waited for her to grant it, and the waiting was itself a concession, and everyone at the table saw him make it. "Please," Alexandra said. He turned the document face down in front of him, deliberately, and when he spoke, it was to the board, not to her. "Everything Ms. Vance has said is accurate," he said. That was not what any of them expected. Heads came up. The instrument runs long. The sign-offs land under the ceiling. Warehouse 6 was leased at 4 in the morning. He let each one sit. "Every fact is correct. What she's offered you is the arrangement of those facts. I'd ask you to hold the vote until you've seen mine." It was good. She'd give him that too. He had walked into the doorway of her own tactic and turned it around, calm as a man closing a drawer. He was telling the room the same thing she was. Trust me, not the story you were just told. And he was doing it after being publicly unseated, which took a kind of nerve she catalogued and did not admire out loud. "You'll have that chance," Alexandra said. "This is a board, not a courtroom, And not a coronation. You'll both be heard. She looked at Ree. Enter a motion. The board resolves to review interim authority in full, with independent access to operations, records, and port throughput data over the next 30 days. Not 90, 30. Ree wrote. Second? Alexandra said. The room held its breath, and the breath belonged to 3 people. The 3 she'd counted at her kitchen table, the 3 who decided everything. Director Bay had already stood for her once, but standing was cheap. A second was a signature. Bay looked at Mugyol. Mugyol looked back at him and said nothing, gave him nothing, which was its own kind of answer. A man too proud to whip a vote in the open. Second, Bay said. Something loosened in Alexandra's chest, and she did not let it reach her face. Discussion? Ree asked, per the form. After, Alexandra said. The motion is only to open the review. Argue the findings when there are findings. She set both hands flat on the folders, her father's exact gesture, and she felt the ghost of it in her own palms. All in favor. Hands. Bays. 2 beside him. Then, down the far side, a 4th and a 5th, the movement contagious now. 6 of the 11 she'd always had. The 3 uncertain. 1, then, after a held second that seemed to cost him something, the second, and their hands went up into the harbor light. 8. Choi kept his hand down. So did the second of Mugyol's, and Mugyol himself sat with his fingers laced again and did not vote at all, which he was entitled to do, and which told the room more than a raised hand ever could. The motion carries, Ree said, and wrote the time. Alexandra looked down the length of the table at the man who, 20 minutes ago, had sent her toward the service door. He looked back at her with an expression she would spend the next weeks failing to read. Not anger, not yet, something more patient than anger. Ms. Vance, he said, and there was almost, something like courtesy in it now. You'll want the port records. I'll have them open to your people by end of day. I know I will, she said, and they'll be the real ones. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the acknowledgement one strategist gives another across a board when the first piece comes off. They'll be the real ones, he said. She gathered her folders and did not thank him, and she did not thank the board, and she stood, and 11 people watched the woman they'd nearly turned away walk to the tall glass at the north wall and put her back to the harbor where, 6 years ago, her father had burned for 2 days, and open the meeting she had come to open, on her own terms, in her own chair, with the whole room finally, correctly, looking at her. The port records arrived at 4 in the afternoon, and they were not the real ones. Hyejin set the first crate on the conference table without a word, and cut the tape with a key. Inside, paper. Reams of it, banded, stamped, ordered. Alexandra lifted one bundle, weighed it in her hand, and put it down. She had asked for the digital logs. She had gotten 12,000 printed pages instead, delivered by a man in coveralls who signed nothing and left before anyone could ask his name. He heard you say real, Hyejin said, so he gave you real, just too much of it. Alexandra walked the length of the table and looked at the crates, 6 of them. A wall of compliance, built to look like cooperation and function like a wall. Then we read, she said. They did not read all of it. They read the index, Hyejin, built from the manifests she'd already pulled from customs, the ones Mugyol's system had never touched. She laid the outside numbers beside the inside numbers and looked for the seams. By 7, she'd found 4. By 9, she stopped counting the ones that matched and started marking only the ones that didn't. The reefer unit was there again, logged empty in, logged empty out. Drawing power for 11 days, it carried nothing. Alexandra circled it and wrote a small number in the margin. the cost of cooling nothing for 11 days, and drew a line from that number to a blank space where a reason should have been. Her phone lit, a message from a number the building's directory did not list. Dinner, tonight, the house on the water. I'll send a car. She read it twice. She put the phone face down on the table. He wants to talk, Heejin said, reading nothing, guessing everything. He wants to be seen talking. Alexandra turned a page. There's a difference. The board suspended his executive authority this morning. He can't sign. He can't move money over the ceiling. He can't lease a warehouse at 4 a.m. anymore. She underlined a custom seal that didn't match its manifest. So now he has to make the woman who took his pen think she owes him dinner. The first gift had come that morning, before the crates. A courier in a pressed jacket, a flat box, a card with no signature. Heijin had opened it because Alexandra wouldn't. Inside, on black velvet, a watch, a woman's watch, platinum, the kind that cost what a crane operator made in a year. No note beyond a single printed line. For the woman who runs the room. Alexandra had looked at it for a moment. Then she'd told Heijin to photograph it, log it, and send it back in the same box by the same courier, unworn, with a receipt requiring his signature. "You're not even a little tempted," Heijin had said. "I'm exactly a little tempted. That's why it goes back." Alexandra had closed the drawer where her father's burned watch still sat, the one stopped at 3:14, the only watch she would wear the memory of. A man who gives you a clock is telling you he wants to own your time. By noon, a second box had come, earrings this time, and a handwritten card, which was worse. She'd sent that one back too. By the time the port records arrived at 4, she understood the pattern. The gifts weren't meant to be kept. They were meant to be refused, so that somewhere, in some ledger of his own, he could write that he had been generous, and she had been proud. She would not give him even that. So when the dinner invitation came, she knew what it was. It was the gift he thought she couldn't send back. She did not send a car back. She drove herself. The house on the water was not a house. It was a floor of one, glass on 3 sides, the harbor lights laid out below like a circuit board someone had switched on for a party of 2. Mugyal met her at the private elevator in the charcoal suit, collar open, the dragon on his neck catching the low light for 1 second before he turned, and it was gone. "You came alone," he said. "You invited me alone." He'd set the table himself, or arranged for it to look that way. 2 settings, a length of dark wood, a bottle already open and breathing. He pulled out a chair. She sat in the one across from it instead. He noted that the way a man notes weather he can't change, and took the seat she'd left him. "The board voted this morning," he said. "They did. You suspended a man who runs 19 cranes. I suspended the authority. You still run the cranes. For now." She unfolded her napkin. "That's why you're feeding me." He almost smiled. He poured the wine. She let him fill her glass and did not touch it. "You think I'm going to fight you page by page," he said. 12,000 pages. "I can make it 12,000 more tomorrow. I have 4 ports and a shipping ministry that returns my calls. You have a woman with a tablet and 30 days. He set the bottle down. "Or we can stop." "Stop. The audit touches operations. Operations are mine. Every hour your people spend in my yard is an hour a ship doesn't move, and every ship that doesn't move is a client who calls someone else." He leaned back. "I'm not offering you a fight, Miss Vance. I'm offering you a partner. Leave operations to the man who understands them. Take your title, your dividend, your chair at the north end. Be the owner. Let me be the machine." It was, she thought, a good offer. It was the offer her father would have been made, in this room, by a man exactly like this one, 6 years ago. She wondered if her father had heard it. She wondered if that was why he was Ash. No, she said. You didn't consider it. I considered it for 6 years. My father got the same dinner, different chair maybe, same view. She turned her glass a quarter turn and left it full. Would be the owner, let the machine be the machine. He must have liked that line. He signed something like it. Then his berth caught fire and burned for 2 days, and the coroner knew him by a watch. She looked at Mughal steadily. I'm not going to be an owner who signs and looks away. That job is filled. It's a grave. For a moment he said nothing. The harbor burned quietly below them. You think I killed your father, he said. I think a man like you was in the room when it was decided he should die. Whether you were the hand or the furniture, I don't know yet. She let the words settle flat, without heat. That's what the 30 days are for. You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry, she folded her hands on the wood. You said the audit touches operations. That's the part you think is a threat. It's the part I came for. I don't want to skip your yard. I want to live in it. Something moved behind his eyes and settled. Then let me make it easier, he said. Warehouse 6. The lease I signed. You don't like how I signed it. Fine. I'll transfer the storage asset. Give it to the holding company. A gift. Call it good faith. He turned his glass by the stem. You get the building you've been circling all week. I get 30 days of a partner instead of an auditor. Everyone keeps their dignity. There it was. A gift. The word sat on the table between them, like a coin she was meant to pick up. She had seen what his gifts did. A gift created an obligation, and an obligation created a thread, and a thread, pulled, could unravel everything she'd stood up in that boardroom to protect. If he gave her the warehouse, then the warehouse was his to give, and one day, in some other room, he could say so. No, she said again. He stopped turning the glass. You want it, he said. You've had 2 people pulling its manifests for 3 days. I want it clean, she stood. You can't give me clean. You can only give me yours. She looked at the harbor through the glass, the water where her father's berth still sat behind a fence, with his name still bolted to it. I'll buy it. From the holding company. At assessed value, wired from an account you've never touched, closed by a firm you've never paid. And when it's mine, it will be mine. Not a thing you handed the maid to keep her quiet. The word landed. She'd chosen it. She watched it land. He rose too, slowly, the way he'd sat down that morning after she'd told him to. You're going to spend your own money, he said, to buy an asset I offered you for free. Yes. That's not strategy, that's pride. It's the difference between an owner and a guest, Mr. Jayon. You taught me that this morning, at the door. She picked up her clutch. Thank you for the wine. I didn't drink it. You'll understand why. She was at the elevator when he spoke again, and his voice had lost the ease, and what was under the ease was the thing she'd made an enemy of. The account you'll wire from, he said. The firm you'll close with. You think they're outside my reach because you found them yourself. A pause. Nothing at this port is outside my reach. That was the deal your father signed. The doors opened. She stepped in. My father didn't sign your deal, she said. He died before he could refuse it. I'm the refusal. The doors began to close. Send me the transfer papers. My lawyer will insult your price, and we'll settle in the middle, like people who don't owe each other anything. The doors closed on his face, and his face was not angry, and that was worse. She bought the warehouse in 9 days. It should have taken 30. He-jin compressed it by refusing to use a single vendor Mughal had ever engaged. New title company, new escrow, a bank 2 states away whose officer had never heard the name Aegis Meridian said in fear. Alexandra funded it from the trust her mother had left. The small one. The one no one had thought to fight her for because it was small. She wired it in 3 tranches, each $1 under nothing, each announced to the board in advance because she had learned the lesson of the 4 a.m. lease and its inverse. Everything she did in daylight, on the record, with a memo. The night the deed cleared, she walked into Warehouse 6 for the first time as its owner. It was cold and it was enormous, and it smelled of salt and rust and something chemical underneath. Rows of racking climbed into the dark. Reefer units hummed along the east wall, 100 of them, breathing. She walked the main aisle with a flashlight and a printout, Jin behind her with the tablet, and she counted bays against the manifest until she reached Bay 41, where the reefer that had cooled nothing for 11 days should have been. It wasn't there. The bay was empty, the power coupling hung loose. The floor beneath it was clean, not warehouse clean, scrubbed clean, a rectangle of concrete, paler than the concrete around it, as if something had stood there long enough to stain and then been taken away, and the stain taken with it. Alexandra crouched. She ran 2 fingers along the seam where the pale rectangle met the dark floor. They came up faintly gray, faintly slick. "Get a sample," she said. "Not our lab. An outside one. Coastal, not corporate." Jin was already unfolding an evidence sleeve she had, apparently, brought expecting exactly this. "You knew it wouldn't be here." "I hoped it would." Alexandra stood. "A thing that isn't where the paper says it is a thing someone moved after they wrote the paper. The paper's the lie, the empty bay's the truth." She swept the flashlight across the loose coupling. "He gave me 12,000 pages, so I'd drown before I got to Bay 41. Her phone buzzed. Mugyol. She let it ring, watching the empty rectangle, then answered on the last tone. "You closed on the warehouse," he said. "An hour ago. I'm told you're inside it." Of course he was told. She looked up at the dark racking, at the corners where a camera would sit if a man wanted to watch his gift stay his, even after he'd sold it. "I'm inside it," she said. "It's mine. I checked the corners for your eyes on the way in. I found 3. They're unplugged now." She let that sit. "You should come see it sometime, Mr. Jeon. Bay 41. There's a clean spot on the floor where something used to be." She heard him breathe. "You wouldn't happen to know what stood there for 11 days drawing power and carrying nothing, would you?" The silence on the line was long. When he spoke, the ease was gone for good, and what replaced it was quiet and careful and, for the first time, not entirely aimed at her. "Leave Bay 41 alone," he said. "Why?" "Because I didn't put it there." A pause she could have driven a truck through, and I don't know who did. The line went dead. Alexandra lowered the phone slowly. Beside her, Jin sealed the evidence sleeve and looked up, and neither of them said the thing they were both now holding, that a man who ran 4 ports and a shipping ministry had just admitted, to the woman auditing him, that something inside his own operation had moved without his hand. "He's lying," Jin said, but she said it the way people say a thing they need to be true. "Maybe." Alexandra turned the flashlight off. In the dark, the reefers hummed, 100 cold machines, breathing over racks of other people's cargo. "But he sold me this building to keep me out of his yard. And the one bay that matters is the one thing in the yard he just told me not to touch." She started back down the aisle toward the loading door, and the harbor and the fence with her father's name on it. "You don't warn someone off a bay you control. You warn them off a bay someone's using you to hide." They walked out together into the salt wind. Behind them, the warehouse she had refused to be given, and paid for herself, sat dark and humming, and somewhere in it, 4 flights down in the paper, was the seam where 2 lies stopped matching, and now she owned the floor it stood on, the coupling that fed it, and the pale clean rectangle where the truth had been carried away in the night by a hand that was not the hand everyone, including the man who owned the port, had been taught to fear. Alexandra got into her own car, in the lot where the Cruise parked, the way her father had. She set the sealed sample on the passenger seat where a person would sit. She did not start the engine right away. She looked at the fence, and the name and the black water beyond it, and for the first time in 6 years, the thing she believed, and could not prove, had a shape she could hold in an evidence sleeve. "Tomorrow," she said, "we stop reading his pages. We follow his money." Hae-jin, in the passenger seat beside the sample, opened the tablet and its light filled the car. "He'll see us coming." "Good." Alexandra started the engine. Let him watch the maid walk straight into the vault. The lab called at 7 in the morning, and Alexandra was already awake. She took the call standing at her kitchen counter, the sealed sample gone from her passenger seat now, and sitting in a chain of custody bag, 200 miles up the coast. Hee-jin had driven it herself. No courier, no name that touched the company. The woman on the line spoke fast, the way people do when they'd rather not be the one saying it. "The residue isn't fuel," the technician said. "It's a stabilizer, marine grade. The kind you'd only pack around a charge if you wanted a burn that reads as an accident." Alexandra set the coffee down without drinking it. "Say that again." "It's a burn accelerant with a delay profile. Somebody stored this to move it, not to sell it. And it's old stock, discontinued 8 years ago. 8 years. 2 years before the tanker went up." She thanked the woman and hung up and stood very still. The clean rectangle on the concrete of Bay 41 had a name now. Not a reefer, not cargo, a staging point. Somebody had kept the makings of a controlled explosion in her own warehouse, under her own manifests, and then wiped the floor and unplugged the unit and left a ghost in the logs. She did not sit down. She called Hae-jin. "Follow the money," Alexandra said. "Starting today. Not the paper, the wires." By 9, they were in the small conference room on 19 with the blinds drawn, the one room Alexandra had swept herself with a handheld unit she bought under a fake name. Hee-jin had built a wall of printouts across the table, and she moved along it the way a surgeon moves along a body, naming what she found. "The lease payments on Warehouse 6 didn't stay in Warehouse 6, she said. "Every dollar Jeon's office signed out for storage got routed within 36 hours. Not to a vendor, to a holding entity in Jeju. From Jeju, it splits 3 ways. Show me the 3. Hae-jin tapped the sheets in order. 2 are real, dredging contractor. A tug fleet, boring. The 3rd is a shipping consultancy that has never, in 6 years, filed a single invoice for actual work. It exists to receive and forward. A pass-through." Alexandra leaned over the paper. The consultancy's name meant nothing. A generic string of English words designed to be forgotten. Who signs for it? "That's the part." Hee-jin slid 1 page free and laid it on top. "Signatory of record is a management company, and the management company files under a corporate officer. 1 name across 4 shells." Alexandra read it. She read it twice, the way she'd read the envelope in her father's story, the way you read something you don't want to be true, so you make certain your eyes aren't lying. Hwang Suk-jin, Chief Financial Officer, Aegis Meridian Holdings. The man who had signed her father's condolence card. The man who had wept at the funeral. Front row, a folded handkerchief pressed under his glasses. She remembered it, because it had embarrassed her father's memory somehow. That public grief, that soft round face crumpling for the cameras. "He's inside," she said. "He's been inside the whole time." Hee-jin's voice stayed flat, but her hand had gone still on the table. The consultancy predates John's emergency instrument by 18 months. Hwang set the plumbing up first. Then your father died. Then the instrument brought John in, and John's operation became the volume that hid the flow. John's ports, John's manifests, John's network. She looked up. He isn't the pipe. He's the water they ran through the pipe. Alexandra straightened. Something in her chest had gone cold and clear, a window wiped down. She had spent 6 years hating the right silhouette and the wrong man. The reefer that wasn't a reefer, she said. Bay 41. Who moves cargo through that bay? Storage sign-off runs through operations. Operations runs through Jaeon. Hyejin hesitated, but the routing instructions, the ones that told the yard which unit went where, those came in as internal memos, under a stamp. Whose stamp? Finance. Hyejin pulled a slim folder to the front. Every anomaly we've flagged, all the way back to the empty reefer, has a finance memo behind it. Somebody in Huang's office has been writing operational instructions and laundering them through Jaeon's authority so they'd look like operations. If anyone ever pulled the thread, the hand on the paper would be John's, not his. Alexandra sat now. Finally, she put both palms flat on the table. He built a frame 6 years wide, she said, and John's been standing inside it thinking he owns the house. They worked the paper until noon, and the picture only sharpened. The lease payments were the newest layer, but the pattern went down and down. Contracts skimmed a fraction under the ceiling, always a fraction, because a fraction never triggers a review. The consultancy forwarding money to accounts that closed within 90 days and reopened under new names. How much? Alexandra said. Total, 6 years. Hyejin ran her thumb down a column she'd already summed. She didn't answer with a word. She turned the page and let the figure sit there. Alexandra looked at it. It was more than the trust her mother left. It was more than the terminal cost at auction. It was the kind of number that doesn't buy things anymore, only buys people. That's not skimming, she said. That's a payroll. For what, though? Hyejin pushed her glasses up. Money that leaves and never becomes a boat or a crane or a paid invoice isn't theft. Theft keeps the money. This spends it. On something. On silence. Alexandra thought of the whistleblower notice with a case number and no court. On the people who make notices disappear. On the coroner who read a valve instead of a charge. On whoever signed the fire off as weather. Hyejin held her eyes a moment. You can't prove any of that. Not yet. Alexandra tapped the number once, then closed the folder over it. But a man who spends this much staying invisible is a man who's terrified of one page. We only have to find the page. And threaded through all of it, the same discontinued marine stabilizer showing up on customs codes 6 years back, moved under a manifest for grain. Grain. Into the terminal her father had just bought at auction. The cursed berth. The one nobody else would bid on. He needed my father to buy that terminal, Alexandra said slowly. The berth was the target. The explosion needed a berth, Aegis-controlled, or it wouldn't read as our failure. Or your father found the plumbing, Hyejin said, and that's why the timeline moves. He filed a whistleblower notice. It's in the estate archive, sealed. I only know it exists because the seal has a case number, and the case number was never assigned to a court. The room went quiet. A notice that went nowhere. A father who saw the water in the pipe and reached for a phone, and 41 hours later, a berth he'd owned for a season lit up at 3:14 in the morning and burned for 2 days. Alexandra looked at her hands and made them unfold. There's more, Hyejin said, and now her voice did something it hadn't done all morning. It dropped. I found it an hour ago, and I wanted the money confirmed before I showed you. She laid the last page down. It was a scan of a clause. Alexandra recognized the letterhead, the emergency instrument, the same document she'd printed 11 copies of at a print shop 4 blocks from her house. But this was a page she'd never seen. Not Clause 9. A page after Clause 9. A page that, in the copies circulating through the company, simply did not exist. There's a rider, Heejin said, attached to the 45% tranche. It's written into the instrument your father's trustee signed during the 90 days. Nobody read it because nobody read past Clause 9. It's a conversion right. A conversion right to what? In the event of a defined solvency crisis, insolvency event, asset seizure, criminal encumbrance on a controlling shareholder, the 45% holder can convert the operational instrument into an equity purchase of the majority stake. Hyejin's finger followed the line. At a distress valuation, a fraction of book, the clause even defines the fraction, 11 cents on the dollar. Alexandra read the clause. She read the word criminal encumbrance. She read solvency crisis. She thought of the lease payments splitting 3 ways in Jeju. She thought of the stabilizer that only made sense if you wanted a fire that read clean. She thought of finance memos wearing operations clothes. It's a machine, she said. The whole thing is one machine. Manufacture a crisis. Freeze the majority holder. Trigger the rider. Buy the company for 11 cents. She looked up. Somebody wrote the crisis into the contract before the crisis existed. Somebody who knew the rider was there when they wrote it, Heijin said. Somebody who could steer a solvency crisis through finance. Huang. Always Huang. But the rider belonged to the 45%, and the 45% belonged to John. The clean, cold clarity in Alexandra's chest cracked down the middle. He gets the company, she said. If I fall, the rider fires, and John buys me out at 11 cents. Huang builds the trap, and John walks through the door and takes the prize. She stood, too fast, the chair scraping, the dinner, the gifts, the offer to buy me out for good faith. He was never courting me. He was keeping me calm and close while the crisis loaded. Alexandra, Heejin's voice was careful. That's the reading that fits. It isn't the only reading. Give me the other one. Heijin turned the rider page over. On the back, in a different hand, a notation, an initial and a date, not Joan's initials. The rider was drafted by finance, Heijin said. Same office, same stamp as the memos. The conversion right is in John's tranche, but John didn't write it in. It was inserted into his paper the way the memos were inserted into his operations. A right he holds that he may not know he holds. She paused. Or knows, and it's the one card he's been saving. I can't tell you which. The paper can't tell you which. Alexandra stood over the table with both trap and man laid out in front of her and, for the first time in 6 years, no clean face to hate. She thought of him in the warehouse, on the phone. That flat second where the irony fell out of his voice. Leave Bay 41 alone, because I didn't put that there, and I don't know who did. She had believed him in the moment. She had built a theory on believing him. The man who warns you off a bay is the man being used to hide it. She'd been right about the shape and blind to the size. She hadn't understood that the thing hiding in his operation was also the thing about to eat him, that he was standing on the trapdoor holding the handle, and he didn't know his own weight was on the spring. Or he did. Or the whole warm phone call confession was one more move, and the 11 cents was the point of everything. 2 readings, same paper. She hated it. The old story was clean. The Mafia boss who took her sala, the man in the charcoal turno who called her a maid, the villain with a dragon on his neck. 6 years she'd sharpened the knife for that man, and the paper on the table wouldn't let her throw it. There's a third party, she said quietly. That's what this is. This was never me against Jeon. This is somebody against both of us, and I've been fighting the decoy. Heejin said nothing. There was nothing to add. The stabilizer, the shells, the rider. A hand had reached through 6 years and arranged all of it, and the hand had a soft round face and a folded handkerchief and a filing cabinet full of memos that pointed at somebody else. Alexandra walked to the window. Below, the port, 19 cranes. The berth where her father burned. She pressed 2 fingers to the glass, the way she'd pressed them to the envelope in the story her mother used to tell, and she made herself think it all the way through. If she moved on Joan now, took him to the board, waived the routing memos, called for his removal, she'd be firing the crisis herself. Attack the 45% holder, create the encumbrance, and the writer she'd just discovered would have grounds. She'd hand Huang the exact solvency event the machine was built to wait for. And if she moved on Huang, she had a CFO with 30 years inside, a paper trail he'd designed to point away from himself, and a conversion right sitting in the hands of a man who might be his weapon or might be his next victim. She turned from the glass. "We don't touch either of them yet," she said. "Not a memo, not a motion. If I so much as blink at Jaeon, I pull the trigger on my own head. Then what do? We prove the fire." Alexandra came back to the table and put her hand flat on the lab report, the marine stabilizer, the 8 years discontinued stock. Everything else is money, and money he can bury under 30 years of clean quarters. But the fire is different. The fire has a body, my father's. You don't get to explain a controlled charge as a valve failure once the residue is in a chain of custody bag. That connects the explosion to the warehouse, Heejin said. It doesn't connect it to Huang. No! Alexandra looked at the writer one more time, at the initial in the different hand, the finance stamp. It doesn't, not yet. She gathered the pages into a single stack, squared them, and slid them into the folder. But somebody wrote a crisis into a contract before the crisis existed, and a man who plans a murder 6 years ahead keeps his own records. Careful men always do. They can't help it. The care is the whole disease. She thought of her father's watch, stopped at 3:14, that she had never once wound. "Where's the phone?" she said. Heejin slid it across. Alexandra didn't call Jaeon. She sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the name she hadn't dialed in 6 years, the name she'd nodded to across a funeral, the soft man who'd told her at the wake to lean on him, to think of him as family, to let the old guard carry the weight while she grieved. She had grieved. She had let him carry it. And every year he carried it a little deeper into the ground. The clarity came back then, but it wasn't cold anymore. It was level. The hatred she'd aimed at the wrong silhouette for 6 years found its real shape, and the shape was small and round and paternal, and had wept on cue in the front row. "He came to the funeral," she said, not quite to Heijin. "He held my hand in both of his." Heijin waited. "I'm going to find the record he kept," Alexandra said. "The one careful men can't stop themselves from keeping. And when I have it, I'm not going to Jaeon, and I'm not going to the board." She set the phone down, face up, the unread name still glowing. "I'm going to Huang, in the same room, and I'm going to let him watch it play." Outside, a gantry crane swung a container over the water and set it down without a sound they could hear from 19 floors up. Somewhere below, in a filing cabinet with a soft man's stamp on it, a machine that had been running for 6 years kept running, patient, waiting for the crisis it had already written. It didn't know the birth had a witness now. It didn't know the residue had a name. And it didn't know that the maid it had counted on to stay calm and close had just stopped hating the wrong man and started reading the one who wept. The seizure notice hit her phone at 6:12 in the morning, and by the time Alexandra reached the terminal, the customs boat was already tied to the hull. She parked at the fence with her father's name on it and got out without the coat closing. Down at berth 9, a vessel that carried her company's charter flag sat low under floodlights, and men in navy windbreakers moved along the deck with clipboards and cameras. Yellow tape ran the length of the gangway. A patrol officer stood at the bottom with his hand near his belt, watching her walk. "That's my ship," she said. "That's the point," he said. He handed her a folded document. She read it standing up, in the wind, with the sun not up yet. Fuel irregularity, undeclared marine stock in the aft tanks, falsified bunker manifests. The charter holder of record, Aegis Meridian Holdings, flagged for a criminal referral. Her name was on the third page, not the company's, hers. Signatory, beneficial owner. The two words underlined by someone's pen before the copy was made. She read the third page twice. Then she folded it back along its creases and held it against her chest the way she had held the board documents on the morning she took the room. The gesture had won her a company once. This time it held a page that said she was a criminal. "I need to speak to whoever's running this," she said. "He already left," the officer said. "Everything's in the notice." Everything was in the notice. That was the design, the stabilizer, the retarded burn, the grain manifests 6 years old. Someone had taken the exact material that killed her father and loaded it into a hold under her flag, and the paperwork that dressed it had her signature laid over the top like a coat over a corpse. She called Hae-jin from the car. Hae-jin picked up on the first ring, which meant she already knew. "The accounts froze at 4, Hae-jin said. "All of them. Operating, escrow, the small trust. Every wire I sent last night bounced back this morning with a hold code." Alexandra pressed her thumb into the steering wheel. The trust too. The trust too. They found the routing, the out-of-state bank, the title company, all of it under the same freeze order. A pause on the line, the sound of paper. The order cites the criminal referral. Once your name's on a referral, the banks don't ask questions. They just close the gate. "How much do we have? In reach? Nothing you can move today." Hae-jin's voice stayed level, the way it did when she was frightened and refused to spend it. "Payroll clears Friday." It won't clear. 19 cranes, 200 and some people who came to work because her father built the place and she kept it standing. Friday, and the machines would run on nothing, and the men who ran them would go home and not come back. "Where are you?" Alexandra said. The small conference room, the walls still up. "Take it down, photograph every page first, then take it down and put it somewhere that isn't the building." Already doing it. She sat with the phone in her lap after the line went dead. Out past the fence, the customs officers were pulling a hose from the seized ship's aft tank into a sample drum, and a man with a camera was shooting the transfer for a record that would say, in a courtroom, that the woman who owned this port had smuggled fuel through it. The humiliation had come back. Not the same one. A bigger one, grown in the dark for 6 years and released this morning at full size. In the boardroom, they had called her the maid. Now the paper would call her the criminal, and the paper had a longer voice. She started the car. By 8, the story was on the wire. A shipping industry feed ran it first. Port Authority seizes vessel, controlling shareholder named in fuel fraud referral. And by 9, it had jumped to the business pages with her photograph. The one from the annual report. The one where she stood at the north glass, looking like a woman who owned something. The comments underneath the article did the work the referral had started. She read 4 of them and stopped. Her phone rang without pause. 2 directors, then Ree, whose voice had steadied a room for her once, and now came through thin. "Alexandra, the board's calling an emergency session. Choi filed the request an hour ago. He's citing the referral. He wants an interim suspension of your executive authority pending the criminal matter." "On what standing?" "Solvency," Ree said. "The frozen accounts. He's calling it a solvency event." The word went through her like a wire pulled tight. Solvency crisis. The writer's trigger, written in language no one used by accident. Insolvency, asset seizure, or criminal encumbrance on the controlling shareholder. This morning she had all three at once. Someone had not merely attacked her. Someone had built the exact shape the contract was waiting to be filled with. "Don't let them convene without me," she said. "Tell Choi I'll be there. Tell him if he wants to remove a shareholder, he can do it," to her face. She hung up before Ri could tell her it was a mistake. The board did not meet that day. Choi could not gather a quorum on a morning when half the directors were hiding from journalists, and that failure bought her a night she did not know how to spend. She spent it in the small conference room after all, alone, with the wall she had told Hae-jin to take down, because Hae-jin had photographed it and then left the photographs printed on the table for her, and Alexandra could not stop looking at the one page that mattered. The writer. 11 cents on the dollar. A conversion right sitting inside the 45% tranche, like a seed inside fruit, and a solvency event had just been manufactured to make it germinate. She traced the clause with one finger. Whoever held the 45 could, from tonight, file to convert. If they filed, and the referral held, and the accounts stayed frozen, the majority she had bled for would be bought out from under her for pennies, and the company her father died owning would belong to the hand that killed him. She did not call Jaeon. His name sat on her phone through the whole night, and she left it there, because she still did not know whether the rider was his card or his cage, and a call would tell him she was afraid. At 2 a.m. she drove home. The building's underground garage took her card on the second swipe. She noticed that. She noticed it the way she noticed the reefer logged empty in both directions. A small wrong thing in a system that did not make small wrong things. The gate lifted. The lights on level 3 were out along the east row, and she noticed that too. And by then, she was already out of the car with her keys in her hand and her back to the concrete. The engine came first. Not headlights. Engine, low and held. The sound of a car idling in a place where cars did not idle. It sat in the dark past the dead lights, and then it moved, and the movement was wrong from the first foot of it, too fast for a garage, aimed instead of driven. She did not think the word. Her body thought it for her. She was already moving before the headlights came up, already between two parked cars when the engine dropped its restraint and roared, and the wall of light and noise came down the lane she had been standing in half a second before. The mirror clipped the trunk beside her and folded with a crack. She hit the concrete pillar shoulder first and kept her feet. The car did not stop. It hunted, braked, reversed, swung its nose toward the gap she'd taken. She went over the hood of a parked sedan on her hands, not gracefully, one boot heel snapping, and came down on the far side with the row of vehicles between her and the light. The car's engine climbed again. She ran, not toward the elevator. The elevator was a box that opened when it chose. She ran for the service stairwell at the north corner, the one her father used, the one she had walked through the day she was called a maid, and she hit the bar with both hands and fell into the stairwell as the car's headlights swept the door behind her and held there, waiting, unwilling to follow into a space too narrow to hunt in. She went up 2 flights on a broken heel before she stopped and put her back against the cinder block and listened. Below her, a car door, then a second engine, then, distant, the first car pulling out fast up the ramp, and the garage settling back into its hum, as though nothing in it had tried to kill her. She sat down on the concrete step. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them the way she'd looked at them on the wire that morning, from a distance, as though they belonged to someone she was responsible for. One palm was scraped raw. She had lost a boot heel, and the shoulder of the trench had torn at the seam. She was alive because the east lights were out, and she had noticed they were out. She took the phone from her coat. Not John. She called Hyejin. "They tried to kill me," she said, and the sentence came out flat, without weight, because she had no weight left to give it. "In the garage." Just now, a car, it waited for me. The line was silent for a full breath. Where are you now? Stairwell, north corner, second landing. She looked up the shaft. I'm going to keep going up. Don't come here. Whoever it was is gone, but I don't want you in this building tonight. You need a hospital. I need to still exist, in the morning. She pressed the back of her head against the wall. If I file a police report tonight, what happens? Jin understood the question under the question. She always did. It goes in the record next to the referral. A woman named in a fraud case reports an attempt on her life the same week. Half the room reads it as fear. The other half reads it as theater. A pause. And it tells whoever did it that it landed. So I say nothing. So you say nothing tonight. You get the scrape cleaned by someone who won't chart it. You come to me at first light, and we decide what the injury is worth as a fact and when to spend it. Jin's voice dropped. Alexandra, this means we're right. Nobody runs a car at a woman who's about to lose anyway. They ran the car because the proof is close enough to matter. Alexandra closed her eyes. The stairwell smelled of cold concrete and old paint, the same smell as the service corridor on the morning she took the room, and the sameness of it did something to her that the referral and the freeze and the car had not quite done. She had come in through the back once because the front was closed. Tonight she had gone up the back stairs because the front wanted her dead. The building had 2 ways in, and both of them were for people who were not supposed to be there. Get me the fire, she said. What? The residue, the chain of custody, the lab record, sealed, notarized. Whatever it takes to make it a thing a court can't wave away. Her voice found an edge she had thought was gone under the shaking. They froze my money and forged my name and put a car on me in a garage. Fine, they can take the accounts. They can take the title, if the writer fires. There is one thing in this whole port they cannot buy at 11 cents, and it's the fact that the stuff that killed my father is the same stuff sitting in that ship's tank right now, with my signature over it. The referral says that fuel is yours. The referral says it's fuel. Alexandra pushed herself up off the step, one hand on the rail, the broken boot cocking her against the wall. It isn't fuel, it's the stabilizer. Same discontinued marine stock, same retarded burn, same material that came in 6 years ago under grain and blew a berth at 3:14 in the morning. They loaded the murder weapon onto my ship to frame me for smuggling, and they were too arrogant to change the compound. She started up the stairs. That's not a frame, that's a signature, and it isn't mine. Jin was quiet, and then, if we can match the seized cargo to the berth 41 sample, then the same thing that proves I'm a smuggler proves my father was murdered. They handed me the fire, Jin. They put it on a ship and tied it to a dock and pointed a camera at it. She reached the 4th landing and stopped, breathing hard, one hand flat on the cold door. I just have to live long enough to say so in the right room. She did not go home. She went up to the 19th floor and let herself into her own dark office and sat on the floor behind the desk where the glass looked out at the port, at berth 9 still lit, at the seized ship sitting under floodlights with the customs boat against its hull like something feeding. She took off the broken boot and set it beside her. She took the folded seizure notice from her coat and laid it on the carpet, and next to it, from the inside zip pocket, where she kept the one thing she never left in the drawer on a bad night, she set her father's watch. Scorched back, clear crystal, 3:14. 2 objects on the floor of a dark office. One said she was a criminal. One said what time her father died. She looked at them side by side and understood that they were the same object photographed 6 years apart, that the hand that stopped the watch was the hand that signed the notice, and that she had spent one night of her life being hunted, and her father had spent 2 days on fire because he had seen this coming and told the truth into a sealed envelope no court ever opened. She did not cry. She had done that already, years ago, on the day they gave her the anniversary shares and the sympathy card that Hwang Suk-jin had signed in his paternal hand. She had cried at the funeral, where he wept in the front row. She picked up the phone one more time. Jeon's name was still there. She held her thumb over it. Somewhere across the port he was a man who had told her, on the phone in the empty warehouse, to leave berth 41 alone, because he hadn't put it there, and didn't know who had. A man whose network had become the water they poured through the pipe. A man who might hold the rider and not know it, or hold it, and have been holding it, against this exact night. The paper didn't decide which, only he could. She put the phone face down on the carpet without dialing. Outside, the floodlights held the ship. Payroll cleared Friday and would not clear. The board would convene the moment Choi found his quorum, and Choi would move to suspend her, and the referral would stand behind him like a wall, and somewhere in a drawer a conversion filing waited for a signature it would get from someone. Alexandra Vance sat on the floor of her father's company with a broken boot, a scraped hand, a forged notice, and a stopped watch, and she was, by every count that a bank or a board or a court could make, finished. She reached over and for the first time in 6 years, wound the watch. The hands did not move, the mechanism was long dead, but the crown turned under her fingers with a small dry resistance, and she turned it anyway, all the way he never got to, and she said, out loud, to the empty office and the lit ship and the man who wept at the funeral and the man across the water she had not called, not 11 cents. Then she set the watch upright on the carpet, facing the glass, facing the port, and she waited for the light to come up so she could go and get the fire. The light came up gray, then white, and by the time it touched the top of the ship in berth 9, Mugyol was already standing at Alexandra's glass, on the wrong side of it, watching her not turn around. He had ridden the service elevator. Nobody rides the service elevator to reach a woman who owns the building. She noticed that before she noticed his face. When she did turn, she saw the midnight suit, the black shirt open at the collar, and something she had not seen on him in a month. A man who had not slept and had stopped hiding it. "You didn't call," he said. "No, you should have." She stayed where she was, back to the port, the watch upright on the carpet between them. "Say what you came to say, Mr. John." He held out his hand. In it was a small recorder, matte black, older than anything else he owned. "Then you'll want to sit." She didn't sit. He set the recorder on her desk instead, next to a thumb drive, and stepped back the way a man steps back from a thing he is done carrying. 3 hours ago, I put a wire under my own coat, he said. I have never done that in my life. In my world, it is the one thing you cannot come back from, and you did it anyway. I did it because someone used my ports to burn a man, and then used the smoke to reach for you. His jaw worked once. I don't lose things twice. She looked at the recorder. She did not touch it. Play it. He pressed the key. The room filled with a voice she knew from a funeral. Warm, unhurried, paternal. The voice that had said, "He was a good man, a builder." Into a microphone 6 years ago, while the coffin held a watch and an anniversary ring, and almost nothing else. Hwang Suk-jin, mid-sentence, comfortable. You worry too much. The girl signs where we tell her the frame points. The frame points at you. Then Mugil's own voice, flat, drawing it out. The stabilizer on the ship is the same as the tank. A pause, a chuckle that never reached anywhere. Of course it is. Why would I buy a second thing that works? I bought enough of it in '98 to burn a fleet. Grain manifests. Nobody counts grain. Alexandra's hand found the edge of the desk. You ordered the berth. Mugyal said on the tape. I ordered a delay. The old man wouldn't take the delay. He filed his little notice on a Tuesday. The voice softened, almost fond. 41 hours is a long time to reconsider. He didn't reconsider, so the valve failed. Coroners write what the paper in front of them says, and I write the paper. She had waited 6 years to hear a stranger say it. She had built a whole self around the day someone would, and now it was here, in a dead man's warm voice, and it did not feel like winning. It felt like the floor going out. And the writer? Mugyal asked. 11 cents, written before the trust was cold. You were the volume, Jayon. You were always the volume. When she's a criminal and the accounts are dust, the 45 converts, and the 45 is held by a man who does what I tell him, because the paper says his hand did all of it. The fondness went out of the voice. You were never the buyer, you were the receipt. Mugyal stopped the tape. The office was very quiet. Down in berth 9 a crane started, then thought better of it. He named the tank, Alexandra said. Her voice came out level, and she was glad of it. He named the notice. He named the hours. He named all of it. Mugyal slid the thumb drive an inch toward her. This is the rest. 6 years of my organization's own ledger. The real one, not the one that files. Jeju, the shells, the memos with his stamp, the account that paid the men in your garage last night. He said it without weight. You'll find your own name where he forged it, everything under it that put it there. She looked at the drive and understood what it was. Not evidence. A confession of a second kind. A man handing over the one book that kept him untouchable, kept him rich, kept him alive. You know what this costs you, she said. I know exactly what it costs me. He almost smiled. Everything the tape says I have. The ports go into the record. The men who answered to me answer to a subpoena now. I gave them the thread that unspools all of it, and my hand is on every knot. He looked at her, steady. By tonight, I am a man with a name and a case number, and nothing else. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because he chose me, the way he chose your father, as furniture. Your father wouldn't be furniture, neither will I. She let that sit. She did not thank him. Thanking him would have made it a gift, and she had learned in this port never to take the gift. The board meets at 11, she said instead. Choi refiled. They have quorum now. I know. He'll be there. Mugyal's mouth tightened. He wants to watch them take the room from you in person. He's been waiting 6 years to watch it. Alexandra picked up the recorder. Then, finally, she bent and lifted the watch off the carpet and set it on the desk face up, 3:14, next to the drive. Then let him watch, she said. The big room was full by 10 to 11. 11 directors, Ree at the wall with his pad, the long table catching the harbor light. Choi had taken a seat near the head with the ease of a man who had already counted. Huang came in last, briefcase under his arm, gray suit, the maroon tie, the paternal smile arriving in the doorway before he did. He set the case down, patted Bay on the shoulder in passing, and found his chair like a man finding his own chair. Alexandra sat at the north head. She wore burgundy. She had chosen it in the dark that morning, the last clean thing that fit the woman she was going to be by noon, and not the one she had been at 2. The tortoiseshell glasses, the gold chain. She had a folder in front of her, and she did not open it. Choi did not wait for her to open the session. Madam Chair, before minutes, the emergency petition stands. There is a criminal referral naming the controlling shareholder. Solvency is triggered. I move that executive authority pass to the interim instrument pending resolution. He didn't look at Huang. He didn't have to. The instrument, as the board knows, carries a conversion provision. This is what it is for. Second, said the second of Mugyal's old two. Huang folded his hands on the table, mancha senis pale in the light, and let his face do sorrow. I take no pleasure in this, he said. To the room, to the wood. I knew her father, but the numbers are the numbers. The company cannot be led from inside an indictment. Alexandra let him finish. She had learned that too. Let the careful man reach the end of the sentence he prepared. Mr. Rhee, she said, is Mr. Jayon recognized to speak? Rhee blinked. He holds the interim instrument. Yes, Chair. She turned her head. Mr. Jayon? Mugyal stood at the far end. Not the host now. Something else. He did not go to the screen. He set the small recorder on the table and slid it to the center, past the water carafe, and it stopped in front of Huang. Before the board votes on who runs this company, he said, it should hear who built the crisis it's voting on. He pressed the key. Huang's own voice walked into the room and sat down at the table with them. The girl signs where we tell her the frame points. The frame points at you. The smile on Huang's living face held for the first 3 words. It came apart on Grain manifests. By. The valve failed. His hand had closed around nothing. Nobody moved. Bay had gone the color of the wall. Choi was staring at the recorder as though it might be persuaded to stop. Coroners write what the paper in front of them says, and I write the paper. Mugyal let it run to. You were the receipt. Then stopped it. Into the silence, Alexandra opened the folder. That is the man who signed the condolence card, she said. 6 years ago, he moved a discontinued marine stabilizer through this port, under grain codes, into a berth this company owned, so that my father's death would read as my father's fault. He built the shell companies 18 months before Mr. Jayon ever set foot in this building. He wrote the 11-cent conversion into the instrument while the estate was still signing. He froze the accounts. He forged my name onto a smuggling referral. She set a single page in front of each of the nearest directors. The ledger, 1 line, Huang's stamp. Last night he sent a car into a garage to remove the last signature that could ever contradict him. Choi had taken his hand off the table. Huang made himself laugh. It came out wrong. A recording of a private conversation. Coerced. Manufactured. Mr. Jun has every reason to. Mr. Jun has handed the authorities his own organization's ledger, Alexandra said. Including the account that paid the 2 men in the garage. Including the wire that cleared your consultancy every 90 days for 6 years. She did not raise her voice. He gave up everything the tape says he has to put it on this table. Ask yourself what a man buys with that. Then ask what you were about to help him lose. She looked at Rhee. One more thing for the minutes. She had a second recorder. She pressed it herself. Her own voice, a month old, from a doorway, and then his. This is a board meeting. Maids don't enter the boardroom. She let the room hear it once. Bay flinched. Choi shut his eyes. He decided who belonged in this room by looking at me, Alexandra said. So did the man beside you. She closed the folder. I hold 51% of the voting shares of this company. I am, by the bylaws, chair. Mr. Rhee, the petition. Rhee cleared his throat and did not need his notes. The petition rests on a solvency event manufactured by an officer of this company, now on record confessing to it. It fails. The chair's authority is unimpaired. He looked up. I'd advise the board to act on what it just heard. Bay stood first. He had stood first once before. I move to remove Seokjin as Chief Financial Officer, effective now, and to refer this recording and the ledger to the authorities. I move to terminate the interim instrument. And I move to place the 45% tranche into judicial custody against restitution of every loss traced to these accounts, starting with a payroll that clears Friday. Second, said Choi. She had not expected Choi. He met her eyes for half a second and looked away, and she understood it was not loyalty. It was a man reading 51 against a recording, the way 11 men had read 51 against 45 in this room a month ago. She would take the vote. She had stopped needing it to be love. All in favor. 11 hands. Huang's stayed on the table, and it did not matter that it did, because the hands went up without it and around it and past it. The paternal smile was gone. What was under it had always been under it. The room simply saw it now. 2 officers were already in the corridor. Ri had made a call before 11. Alexandra had asked him to. Huang stood when they came in, because a man like that stands, straightens the maroon tie, reaches for the briefcase out of habit. One of them took the briefcase. He looked at Alexandra on his way past the north head, and the mouth opened. "Your father," he began. "Filed his notice on a Tuesday," she said. 41 hours. I know. It's on your tape. They took him through the double doors. The room did not watch him go. It watched her. The table emptied slowly, the way a room empties when the people in it need a minute before the elevators. Ri gathered the pages. Bei stopped at the north head, put his hand flat on the wood once as if to feel that it was still there, and said nothing worth writing down, which was the kindest thing anyone said all day. Mugyul waited until it was the 2 of them and the harbor. He had changed nothing. The same suit, no watch on the wrist now, she noticed. The luxury piece gone, sold or surrendered or simply left behind with the rest of it. A man measured against the day in the plainest terms he had left. He came to the north end but stopped short of it. "They'll want me by tonight," he said. "The record I gave them has my name on every knot. I told you it would." "I remember." "I'm not asking you to fix that. I put it there myself." He looked at the port, then at her. "I'm asking one thing, and then I'll go where they take me. I spent a month buying you dinners and sending you watches, and none of it was worth the tape I made at 3 this morning. I know that now." His voice was very even. "I'd like the chance, someday, to be seen by you as a man with no ports, and no instrument, and nothing in his hand, not the buyer, not the volume, just the man who chose the truth, when it cost him everything he was." She looked at him for a long moment. She did not look away, and she did not soften the way a story wants a woman to soften. "You changed," she said. "I believe that. A month ago you couldn't see me across a doorway. Last night you put a wire under your coat for the man you couldn't see." She let it be true, fully, because it was. "That's real. I won't pretend it isn't. But I didn't survive him to belong to the next man who runs this port." She said it without heat, which was how she had decided, somewhere on a service stair with a broken heel, to say the truest things. "My father took the offer once. Be the owner, let me be the machine. I've heard the offer in 3 voices now. I'm going to run my own machine. That's the whole of it." He took it standing. Whatever else he had been, he knew how to lose the thing he had actually wanted. "Executive director," he said. "You. By this afternoon." A small breath. The way it should have been 6 years ago, before anyone signed anything at 4 in the morning. He nodded, once, and turned to go where men were waiting to take him. At the doors he paused. "The watch," he said. "It stopped at the hour." "It did. Wind it." "I already did." She almost smiled. "It still won't move. Some things you wind so you know the hands are yours to hold, not so they turn." He went through the doors. She did not watch that either. She had watched enough men leave that room to last her. Alexandra stood a while at the north glass, burgundy against the light, the port laid out below, where 19 cranes turned freight her father had bid for, at an auction everyone called cursed. Berth 9 still wore its yellow tape. It would come off. The payroll would clear Friday. The 45% would sit in a court's hands until it had paid back every dollar it had burned, and she would spend the paying back learning the name of every worker whose Friday she had just saved. She took the watch out of her folder and set it on the sill, face to the water. 3:14. The crown wound tight and the hands still where the fire had left them. Down on the quay, a man in a windbreaker rolled the tape off a bollard and coiled it. Unhurried, the way men do work that outlasts the men who ordered it stopped. He had thought he owned the room because he held 45% of the company. She had only ever needed 51% of the truth. If you want to watch all the stories without any ads and also get access to bonus scenes, extended epilogues, and exclusive spicy chapters, head over to our Patreon. Scan the QR code on the screen. The link is in the description or in the pinned comment. See you there. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room where people decided who you were before you spoke a single word? Have you ever carried the weight of a loss everyone else called an accident, knowing in your bones it was something else? And when the truth finally surfaced, did you choose your own freedom over the hand that reached for you too late? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about truth, dignity, and justice, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.